Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this episode of From Vice to Water, we're going to talk about how to maintain one of the most important pieces of your fly fishing equipment, and that's your fly line. Stay tuned. Being involved in fly fishing for over 25 years, I have been incredibly lucky to have had a number of great mentors along the way. Guys that have shared their experiences and tips with me, they've given me feedback, but most importantly, they've shared their opinions with me. And I think most of you can agree that anytime a mentor shares their opinion with us, we take that as law. We truly take it to heart. I can vividly remember one experience that I had with one of my mentors, Doc Bull. We were in a fly shop and I was over at that display case looking at some of those brand new fly reels when all of a sudden Doc came running over and said, "Tim, put away your money. You don't want to be investing in a fly reel for trout. You want to be putting your money into the fly line." And boy, was Doc absolutely correct. I still do love those fly reels, but I have easily learned over the years that the fly line is such a critical piece of equipment that we have in this sport, and we have to treat it accordingly. So for starters, hopefully you've done your research and you've selected a great fly line that really will help and really will benefit you in whatever realm of fly fishing that you're getting into. But next, we have to do our best to maintain that fly line. I've heard that there are individuals out there that will clean their fly line every trip or every other trip out, whereas I know of others that have never cleaned their fly line in years, and I tend to fall somewhere in the middle. If I have a fly line that I'm using regularly throughout the season, I will do my best to clean it at least 2 times a year. Whereas those other fly lines that I don't use as much, just occasionally, maybe a few times a year, I'll do my best to clean those at least once every other season. But I'm constantly checking my line to make sure there's no cracking, to make sure the finish is intact, and to make sure those lines are really supple. And those are really important things to do, especially for floating fly lines. What I'm going to be doing for the rest of this video is just taking you through some simple steps that I take whenever I'm cleaning my fly lines. I'm just going to go through each step and give you some tips and some of my own thoughts along the way. As many of you may know, both my Uncle John and I build bamboo fly rods. And we travel around the country to various bamboo fly rod gatherings, and at some of those gatherings, there's an occasional casting competition. At any serious casting competition, there's always at least one representative for a fly line company there, and I have always asked that person a ton of questions about different ways to clean and maintain your line, the products they recommend, and even current lines or new lines that they might have coming out in the future. Well, I can tell you that I've gotten a bunch of different answers, especially when it comes to products to use on your line after the initial clean. Yet I can tell you that every single representative has recommended the first step that I'm going to be showing you right now, and it's an absolutely easy one to take. All I have is a plastic container, some dish soap. This is just we'll say a dish scrub pad, but it's got kind of a rough side to it, and a soft cloth. To start, I take maybe 5 or 6 drops of the dish detergent, place it into this bowl, and fill it about, we'll say 5/6 of the way full with a really hot water, not scalding hot, but hot. Once it's full, I'll take my fly line, strip it off the reel, and take about maybe 60 feet of it, basically the fly line section that I know has been off my reel lately, and I'll put it into this water. Once it's in that hot, soapy water, I move it around with my hands just to agitate it. And I'm going to let it sit in that water for at least 5 minutes. Once it's been in there for about 5 minutes, I'm going to pull it out, but as I pull it out, I like to fold this pad. I'll get this pad wet first, and I want to run that fly line through it so I can agitate and try to get all that dirt and stuff off of the fly line. So I pulled all that 60 feet back through this. Then I'll actually take some cold water. I'll typically do this in my sink, and I'll just wash off that fly line with the cold water. And then I put it back in this bucket a second time. I put it back in that warm water one more time. And then that second time, after it's sat for about 5 minutes, I'll pull it out again. This time I'll pull it out on the softer side of this scrub pad. Once I get it pulled out that second time, again, I'll just wash it off with some cool water. And then I'll go through it again with the rag. And I'll pull the line through this rag, just making sure I get any final dirt or dust that it could have picked up while it was sitting and get all of that water off of it. Then I just let it sit and dry for we'll say a half an hour, no more than that. Now, I can tell you every single one of those fly line representatives said if there's nothing more that you do than to clean your line with warm soap, an aggressive pad, and some water, you will be set. So I can assure you that if there was one step that you're going to take, an easy step, this would be that one. Before starting the second step, I prefer to change locations and move somewhere else in my house that's not going to be receiving a lot of foot traffic overnight, because I'm going to be leaving this fly line out in long, loose coils. So I might move to a side room and I'll be setting this on a chair, maybe go out to the garage, down in the basement. Basically somewhere that I know my two dogs, Sophie and Izzy, aren't going to wander into and get themselves attached to this fly line and pull it and my fly reel all around the house. So once I've made that move, all I'm going to need is some type of fly line dressing and cleaner and a couple of rags. Let's first talk about this dressing and cleaner. As I mentioned before, I talked to all these different fly line representatives, and they recommended pretty much every fly line dressing I've ever heard of before. I can tell you I've used a bunch over the years, and there's not one that just stands out above all others that I would recommend to you today. If I remember correctly, for the first 5 or 6 years of getting into fly fishing, I was using Armor All, and I think it worked just fine, though I would Google that before using it. But I don't even know why I made the shift from it. I think it's because of going to some of those competitions, I just started receiving a bunch of these fly line cleaners, and I've been using them ever since. The last 3 that I remember using have been Glide, Loon, and this Cortland, and they've all worked well. But if any of you could do me a favor, and if you could post in the comments section below which fly line dressing and cleaner that you would recommend, that would be wonderful. If there's one that you've used that you would say, hey, this is one that I've had great success with, and recommend it to others, I would greatly appreciate that. You can post that on this YouTube page, or you can post it on my Facebook page, or even email me, and I'll post it accordingly. I would really appreciate that, just to see what else is being used out there, especially if it's Armor All. Well then, once we're ready, I'm going to take my rag, and I'm going to be applying some of this fly line dressing to the rag. Now, before you apply this, make sure you shake it really well. The majority of them recommend that. Once you have it on the rag, you're going to take your fly line and pull it through. I pull it through about 5 or 6 times, then I stop, I look in the rag, and I make sure it's still applying an amount of this fly line dressing to the fly line. Now, here's a really critical step. Before doing all this, wherever your fly line is getting placed, if it's getting placed onto the ground, once you pull it through the rag, make sure you have a towel on that ground, because it's going to be a little wet. It's going to have a little bit of this dressing on it. And if there's dust or a little bit of dirt on that location where you're dropping your fly line, it's going to be sticking to it. So make sure you put a towel down first. Run your fly line through it. If at any point you look on that rag and you realize there's not a lot of dressing, just put a few more drops. Excuse me. Once you have your entire fly line dressed, just keep it in those loose coils, set it on that chair, and walk away from it. I prefer to let it sit overnight, about 12 hours. I think some of those bottles recommend 24 hours. I don't think I've ever waited that long, but the next day at some point, I'll go back through and I'm going to wipe it off with that second cloth 2 times. I'm going to wipe it off once. Basically, you're just buffing the line. You're removing all of that fly line dressing. And then I grab my reel and I hold onto the line with that towel in another spot and I reel it in. So as I'm reeling that line in, I'm putting it back on my reel, I'm also removing any dust with that second buffing. And that's all there is to it. So that second step is really a critical one because it will really properly dress that fly line, and it just seems to make it float a lot better. I can tell you that many of those representatives has said if you do nothing more than just the warm water and soap, that's fine, but they definitely do say that this seems to add a little bit more treatment to the entire process, hence why I do it, especially to floating fly lines. Well, before I wrap up this video, the only other aspect of fly lines that I want to mention is the notion of not getting chemicals on the fly lines. And I'm talking about maybe bug spray, sunscreen, or whatever else you use that is considered a chemical that might do damage to your fly line. Now, most fly line manufacturers will say, don't let any chemicals touch your fly line. But again, from talking to those representatives, a lot of them say that they believe there's a lot of misinformation out there. In fact, one of them even told me that he took a fly line and he soaked it in one of those bug sprays that's like 80% DEET for a week, and everything was fine with that fly line. Now, I've heard of these horror stories where there have been certain chemicals that have melted the fly lines. I can't verify if those are true or not. But I do know that if you are getting any chemicals on your fly line, whenever you get home from fishing, try to wipe them off as fast as possible, even if you're using nothing more than warm water and soap, just to remove them from your fly line and know that it's clean again before you go out fishing the next day. Most importantly, so you're not putting those chemicals back into fresh water where you are fishing. Well, if you have any other thoughts, any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them on this YouTube page, or as always, you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. If you'd like to watch more of these From Vice to Water videos, you can check them out at my website, which is troutandfeather.com. I also have a Facebook page, and if you like that, you'll receive some regular fly fishing and fly tying updates. Well, as always, I greatly appreciate the view, everybody, and thanks so much, and I hope you learned a little bit more about cleaning and maintaining your fly line.